Complex database queries with operations like joins or group by statements can often be frustratingly slow. Slow queries make slow apps, and slow apps are bad for business. According to Google, every 1 second delay in page load speed can reduce conversion rate by 20%. Modern apps need to handle big volumes of data, but that doesn't mean that query speed has to suffer. A tool called Epsio makes these problems a thing of the past, and I want to tell you all about it in this video. Epsio is a database plugin that makes your queries faster by updating the results anytime the underlying data changes. And this is without ever needing to recalculate the entire dataset. It's just magic. This means that large, bulky group by queries that typically need to evaluate every single row in your table can instead be retrieved by only looking at a handful of records. Epsio works by detecting changes that are made to your base tables and then incrementally updating the corresponding views. This means that changes to your underlying data are automatically propagated into the derived tables. Using Epsio, you can make some of your queries up to hundreds of times faster when compared to a standard setup. Epsio also supports a broad variety of databases, including Postgres, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, and Snowflake, just to name a few. It even integrates with cloud providers like AWS, so you can use it on the cloud. And on top of all of that, Epsio is free to try for 30 days. And if you want to use it beyond that, it features a flexible pay-as-you-go pricing model. So let's get Epsio set up on our AWS account right now. It's super simple to do and takes less than 10 minutes. So here's the game plan. All right, so first we're going to head over to the Epsio website to sign up for our account. From there, we're going to use the Epsio console to create what's called a deployment. In the initial setup, we'll choose to use a Postgres database that's hosted on AWS. Now, selecting AWS will trigger a CloudFormation deployment in our AWS account. The CloudFormation template that we deploy creates an EC2 instance with the needed network configuration. Now, in terms of what this EC2 instance is used for, well, Epsio uses it to listen for data updates that are occurring on your underlying database. And then if needed, it performs the corresponding updates to the views that you set up initially. In the case of Postgres, it uses a database feature called logical replication to get notified whenever changes occur. You don't have to understand the details of how Epsio works behind the scenes. You just need to know that this EC2 instance is responsible for updating your database. Next comes the database itself. And for this, we're going to be using Postgres that's hosted on AWS's relational database service. Now you can either set up a new database from scratch or bring one along that you already have created. Now I'm not going to bore you with all the details of creating a new database. I think we all know how to do that. So I'm just going to use one that I already set up in advance. Now next we need to make some small modifications to the permissions of our new EC2 instance in our database. Last step, we're going to do some minor configuration changes to ensure that we have logical replication set up on our database before verifying it and ensuring we're good to go. And that's all we need to do. We'll be ready to connect to our database using pgadmin and then start playing with Epsio and see what it has to offer. So let's get to it. All right, so first things first, let's head over to the cloud.epsio.io website to create our initial account. All right, so as you can tell, I already have my own account already set up and ready to go. But for your case, you're going to want to click on the sign up button down here. Now you don't need to provide any credit card information or any payment information at all. You simply need to provide your email and password and then verify your email address to get started. So for me, I'm simply going to log in by clicking on the sign in button down here. All right, so this is the Epsio homepage. Now the first thing that we need to do is go ahead and create our deployment. And we do that by clicking this button right here. So let's go ahead and do that now. And now we need to choose the database type that we want to use here. So we're going to be using Postgres. So make sure you click on that. Now you have two options when it comes to setting up your database using Epsio. The first option is the default one that's selected over here on the left. And as you can tell, yada, 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 it's self-hosted for Ubuntu and Mac. This is great to just get started and experiment to see what Epsio has to offer. But if you're like me and you want to use AWS, then you're going to want to go with this right-hand option here. This is going to allow you to integrate it with your RDS database that's hosted in the cloud. And I just love the cloud, so let's do that. All right, so let's click on AWS CloudFormation here on the right, and now we're going to go to Continue. All right, next we need to choose the type of EC2 instance that Epsio is going to use to listen for updates from our database and then perform the corresponding updates into our views. So you have three options here. You have the lightweight, you have the medium, and then you have the power. Now, which option is right for you depends on what are the usage characteristics of your database. If you have a really high volume of workload, then you're going to want to go with the power instance or even the medium instance. But if you're just testing things out like we are, then you're going to want to go with the lightweight instance just to see what this thing has to offer. I'm going to go ahead and select the lightweight instance here. All right, now that we've done that, we're going to want to go ahead and click on this button here, Launch CloudFormation. Now what this is going to do is going to open up our AWS account with the CloudFormation template that is provided by Epsio. This is going to set up that initial EC2 instance, all the networking stuff that it needs to ensure connectivity, and an IAM role so that Epsio can perform corresponding updates as it needs to. Now make sure when you click this button, you're already signed into your AWS account or you may have some problems. All right, so let's go ahead and click on Launch CloudFormation. And as you can see, this is opening up a new tab. All right, so let's talk about some of these options that are available to us here. Now, first thing to note is right here. This is the AWS CloudFormation template ID that Epsio is using. Now you can copy this URL that you see in front of you and paste this into your browser up here to see all the resources that Epsio is going to set up. I highly encourage you to do this just to see what it's going to create on your behalf. All right, and down here we have the stack name. You can name this whatever you want. And finally, we have the subnet ID and the VPC ID. Now in a perfect world, I'd select a private subnet, but just to keep things simple here and ensure we can get along smoothly, I'm going to choose a public one. And then for VPC, I'm just going to use the default AWS VPC that comes with my account. All right, so let's change our stack name here. I'm going to change this to Epsio stack. For our subnet ID, I'm going to choose the top one that I have right here. And then for VPC ID, I'm just going to select the default AWS VPC right here. All right, let's scroll down a little bit. For permissions, we don't need to do anything here. Yada, 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 following AWS resources require capabilities. Go ahead and click on the checkbox here. And now we're ready to go to the bottom right here and click on Create Stack. All right, here we go. Now, if we click on the refresh button, you'll see here a stream of the resources that are being created through CloudFormation on behalf of Epsio. If you click on refresh again and again, you can see the progress over time. Now you may want to go grab yourself a drink or a coffee or something like that, because this may take a couple minutes. All right, if you take a look at the left-hand side here under the Epsio stack, we now have a create complete status. That means that we're all done here. Let's go back to the Epsio dashboard and see what's next. As you can see, it's received an IAM role, and Epsio is now creating that EC2 instance on our behalf. Now this may take a couple more minutes, but in the meantime, let's go back into my AWS account to take a look at that EC2 instance. I'm going to type in EC2 and we're going to click on this guy and go to instances running. And as you can see here, we have an Epsio instance and here's the instance ID for it. And if you notice the status over here, it's currently in initializing state. So we're just going to go back to our Epsio tab and wait for this to refresh. Again, it may take a couple minutes for the instance to stand itself up. All right, so as you can see under the status check field, we have 2 out of 2 checks passed. So our instance is good to go. If we go back to our Epsio homepage now, you'll see that we have now advanced to the second step here. We're currently on the prepare your database step. Now this is just asking us to run some commands to set up an Epsio user, create a schema, yada, yada, yada. I'll walk you through these things in a second. However, before we advance to this step, there's a minor permission setup that we need to do. This involves setting up the security group so that our EC2 instance and our Postgres database are allowed to talk to one another. So let's do that now. All right, so let's go back to our EC2 instance here. And when you click on it, you can see down below under the security section, we have the security groups hyperlink that we can click on here. So let's go ahead and click on that and make sure that you have outbound rules selected. And we're going to go to edit outbound rules. Now what we need to do here is click on add a new rule here in the bottom left. And in terms of the type, we're going to change from custom TCP and we're going to type in Postgres here. Postgres SQL, perfect. And then in terms of the destination, we need to select the security group of our RDS database. Now for mine has a little bit of a weird name. It's called EC2-SG-public subnet. I know the names are terrible here, but make sure you name your security groups well. Often it helps you out later on. All right, so we're just going to go down now and click on save rules here in the bottom right. All right, sweet. So that's set up. Now we set up the permissions from our EC2 to talk to our Postgres database. Now we need to do the opposite. We need to allow the Postgres database inbound rules to receive traffic from the EC2 instance. So let's go ahead and do that now. Before I go there, we need to remember the name of the security group for our EC2 instance. And in this case, it's right in front of us, right here. So it's Epsio_SG_DI, blah, 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 blah. So just keep that in the back of your mind. All right, so let's go to our RDS database now. I already have it open under a new tab here. And as you can see, I already have one set up here. So we have a DB and it's currently in available state. So this thing is good to go. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on it now and scroll down a little bit under the connectivity and security section, which is provided by default. And if you look right over here under the security section, you can see the VPC security group that belongs to this RDS database, or rather is assigned to it. So we're going to go ahead and click on it now. This is going to bring up the homepage for it. And we're going to click on this first one here. And then we're going to go to inbound rules. All right, so we're going to go ahead and click on edit inbound rules right here. And we're going to do something super similar. So we're just going to click on add rule here in the bottom left. And this time we're going to set the type as all TCP. And then we're going to select as the destination. Now we need to remember the name of our EC2 security group, which was Epsio right here. All right, go ahead and click on that, and then go ahead and click on Save Rules in the bottom right. Okay, cool. We're good for the security group setup, and we now have permissions for our EC2 and our Postgres instance to talk to one another. All right, so now it's time to run the corresponding commands that we see here under the Epsio console page. We need to create a user for Epsio. We need to grant some schema changes and make some small updates here, and then provide the corresponding information into the database connection details before we can click on connect. So let's go to my RDS instance here, and we're gonna go and type in RDS. We're gonna go back to the page that we were on previously, click on DB instances, and as you can see for DB test 1 here, and if we scroll down a little bit, so 2 key things to note here. First of all, I set up this database to be publicly accessible, but for you, you'll probably have a private database and use a jump box to connect to it. Second thing to note is that right here under the endpoint. This is the endpoint that we need to connect to using pgadmin in order to run those commands provided by Epsio. So I'm just going to grab this URL right here, copy that to my clipboard. I'm going to go and open up my Epsio console, which is right here. And then we're going to click on add new server. Give this thing a name. Go to connection, paste in that host name, which we just copied from our clipboard, and then go ahead down here to where it says password and insert the password for your database. All right, and we should be good to go here. Go ahead and click on save in the bottom right to test our connection. And there we go. We are now connected from our home machine to our AWS database. Sweet. So we're now ready to run some of the commands that are on the Epsio console. So let's go do that now. And we're just going to grab some of the commands here. So first we need to create a user for Epsio. We're going to click on this to copy it to our clipboard. I can just navigate here and find our database, which is this one here. I'm going to right click on this sucker and then go to query tool. This is going to open up a query section for us. All right, great. So let's just paste in that command. And then we're just going to change the password here. And let's just do something silly and naive like password. Gonna run this guy by clicking on that. All right, perfect. We're able to create the role here. All right, what's next? Next. All right, let's just copy all of these commands all at once to see if we can do it in one shot. Go back to pgadmin and let's just drop all of this in. Gonna highlight it all and just click on execute. Looks like everything was set up correctly. All right, so just a couple small things to remember. Our database name is test_db. Epsio is going to be asking for this, so we need to remember that. Under database name, I'm just going to put that in right now so we don't forget. We need to put in the password that we entered previously. So I just put in password for, let's just try that again, password for the Epsio user, which we just did, and just paste this in. All right, we should be good to go here. Let's click on connect and give this a whirl. All right, so this is the final step of things that we need to do. We just need to enable logical replication for our database. Now, if you were doing this locally on Ubuntu on your Mac, this would be a whole lot easier. But since we're doing it in AWS, it's a little bit more complicated. So I set up some of the settings for you so you don't have to worry about it. So let me just show you what I did really quick. So if we go back into the console here, under this database, and we go to configuration, you should see down here, we have a DB instance parameter group. This is the default parameter group. This just effectively contains some settings that specify how our database runs in AWS. Now for the instructions, you need to create a separate parameter group that has logical replication already enabled. Now I already did this, so I already have one already created that has this setting enabled. So all we need to do now is change the instance parameter group to the one I've already made. So let's go do that now. We're going to go to modify up here, and then we're going to scroll all the way down to where it says parameter group. Hopefully I don't miss it here. There it is right here. So let's go ahead and click on this, and we're just going to change this to our Epsio parameter group. We're going to go to continue in the bottom right here, click on this sucker, and then make sure you select this button here to apply immediately. And then after that, you're going to click on this button here to modify the DB instance. So let's do that now. I'm going to click on apply immediately and then modify DB instance. And then as you can see in the top section here, we've successfully modified the database. And as well, you can see that it's currently in the modifying state. So let's just give this a minute to catch up. All right, so the status is now under available. We need to do one last thing here. We need to go to actions, and then we need to go to reboot. and click on confirm here in the bottom. And this will take another minute or so in order for the parameter group to take effect. All right, so we're back in the Epsio console. A couple small things to do here. Let's validate that our database does have replication enabled. You can see there's a command here. We're going to copy this to our clipboard and go back to pgadmin and just paste this guy in and run it. And you can see in our results that indeed logical replication is currently enabled. Perfect. All right, let's run the final sets of commands so that we can tie this up. And on the right-hand side here, we're going to grab the RDS commands here, the top two. So we're going to create a publication, back to pgadmin, and just paste that in again. All right, that created successfully. All right, last step. Looking forward to this. Go ahead and copy this bottom one here to grant the replication to the Epsio user. And just remove all this and paste that in. Run. All right, perfect. We're finally ready to go. We're just going to validate that everything is good to go by clicking on the validate configuration button here. And this may take a moment or so for it to validate. Beautiful, success. Everything is good to go here. For this demo, we're going to use the popular New York City taxi ride dataset. This image is a heat map visualization of the data that we're going to be working with. The bright orange areas indicate that there's a lot of pickup or drop-off locations for taxi rides. Now, I'm going to be running a script in the background that's going to stream data into our database as if they're happening in real time. So let's go explore the data. All right, so here's a quick preview of some of the records in our trip table. The trip table contains most of the data in this dataset, and every record corresponds to a pickup and a drop-off location for a corresponding ride. And as you can see, there's a couple interesting fields that are in this dataset. We have our vendor ID that corresponds to the company that performed the pickup. Then we have the pickup time. We have the drop-off time. We have the number of passengers. We have the trip distance, the rate code, which is mapped to a foreign key in a different table, some other metadata here, and some other pickup location zone IDs that we're going to look at a little bit later. So here's what our data set looks like for now. Now, what if we wanted to write a query that groups all of the records by the vendor ID over here? So for example, we want to know all the trips in our data set that correspond to vendor ID 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. How would we do that? So the normal query would look a little something like this. Select vendor ID. All right, so we're selecting the vendor ID and the count as the vendor count variable from our trips table, and we're grouping all of the results by the vendor ID. Now let's take a look at what the results look like, and let's pay special attention to what the performance is of this query. All right, so let's execute it. And we can see in the bottom right here, this took around 564 milliseconds to run this query. And if we look in our results table over here, we can see the grouping. So for vendor ID 1, we had 3,302 trips. For vendor ID 2, we had 10,917. All right, so how would we create a corresponding query using Epsio? Well, it's a pretty simple syntax, and it looks a little something like this. So first we're going to say call, and then we're going to use the keyword epsio.create_view. And then we need to pass in a couple parameters. The first parameter is the name of our view, and the second parameter is the query that we like to encapsulate into the view. So for the view name, let's call this trips by vendor. And for the query, we just need to copy and paste what we have here up top. All right, so that's all we need to do to create a view. Let's run this, and for the first time, it may take a second or so. All right, now let's query this view directly. So it's a pretty simple syntax to do that. So let's just select, and we're gonna say vendor ID, vendor_count. All right, now before I run this, remember that for our first approach, just querying the table directly, it took around 550 milliseconds. Let's see how long this one takes. Executing this. All right, 324 milliseconds as we can see in the bottom right. Let's run it one more time to see if it was a fluke. Ooh, even better, 235. For the next one, what if we wanted to write a query that keeps track of the total number of fares by the rate type? Some being standard, some being negotiated, some being for the airport. What would that look like? So the query would look something like this. So select rates. All right, so what is this query doing? So we're taking the description from the rates table, we're taking the count of all the trips, and we're storing that as number of trips. And then we're joining rates on the trips rate code ID with the rates rate code. And remember that rates is in a different table. And then we're gonna group them all by the description and then order them by the number of trips, and we're gonna look at the top 10. So what's the performance of this query? So let's run this. And it looks to be around 390 milliseconds like we can see. And here's what the results are. So we have the standard rate with a little bit less than 30,000. We have JFK rides with around 1,300, and et cetera, et cetera. So let's turn this into an Epsio view and see what the performance is like there. So we'll say call epsio.create_view. All right, so this one's a little bit ugly because it's on multiple lines, but let's give this a whirl. Now let's query the table. All right, for this one, we're going to select the description and the number of trips from that view name. And let's see what the performance is like for this one. All right, 231 milliseconds. That's quite a bit better than our previous. All right, for our last query, what if we wanted to know the number of trips that are grouped by the pickup location zone that we're in? What would that look like? Well, it would be select, and we need the zone. All right, so in line 1 here, we're getting the zone count, and we're storing that as the ride count. And then we're going to join that on our zones table. We're going to grab the pickup location ID and the location ID. Then we're going to group them by the corresponding zone and then order them by the number of ride counts per zone. And we're going to take the top 10. So let's see what the results look like initially. Okay, give this a run. And it's around 403 milliseconds. And we can see that JFK Airport is leading the way with around 2,737 rides. All right, so let's convert this to an Epsio view and see what the performance is like. So we're going to say call epsio.create_view. And this is going to be trips by pickup zone. And there we go. So let's just register this view. And finally, let's query from the view. So we're going to say select zone and ride count. All right, let's give this a run. All right, 207 milliseconds. That's great. And as you can see, JFK Airport is still leading the way with around 3,000 rides. So that's Epsio. Hopefully you can see how useful it is for keeping track of your data changes over time without having to query your entire database. If you'd like to give Epsio a try, check out the link down below in the comments and the description section. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.